The morning of her wedding, Eliza Morland thought she had everything: a wealthy husband, a grand estate, and the power to crush anyone beneath her station. But when a frightened slave girl offered a simple ribbon as a wedding gift, Eliza's cruel mockery in front of the gathered guests would unleash a chain of events that would destroy everything she held dear. Hidden in that innocent ribbon was a map to freedom, sewn by trembling fingers, that belonged to the true heir of the very fortune Eliza was marrying to claim. What Eliza didn't know was that the slave child she humiliated carried papers that could shatter her world and a bloodline that would expose the darkest secrets of the plantation. Before the sun set on what should have been her perfect day, the wedding would be cancelled, fortunes reversed, and the girl she tried to break would be wearing the family ring that was rightfully hers. Subscribe and tell me which city you're watching from, because this story of betrayal and justice will leave you questioning everything you think you know about power. The kitchen held the hour before dawn, like cupped hands hold water. Steam rose from the iron skillet, where fat cornbread bubbled and popped. Mara pressed her needle through the last bar of colored thread, blue for the low notes, gold for the high ones, red for where the hymn lifted toward heaven. Her fingers moved quick and sure. She had stitched by candlelight after the supper dishes, matching each thread to the tune that lived in her head. Weighed the lantern low sang itself through her needle, one bar at a time, until the narrow ribbon stretched long as her palm. Cook ladled grits into the warming pot. "Child, you've been humming that tune all week." Mara ducked her head. The hymn had words, but she knew better than to sing them aloud where ears might hear. Instead, she let the melody rise and fall like breath, like water over stones. The latch clicked. Nathaniel Grayson stepped through the kitchen door, his boots soft on the plank floor. His wedding rehearsal would gather the house this afternoon. Tomorrow, he would marry Miss Eliza Morland and bind their family's land and ledgers. Morning, cook, ladies. He nodded to the kitchen hands, then paused at Mara's stool by the window. She stood quick, the ribbon tight in her small fist. Her heart drummed against her ribs. She had planned this moment for days, but now her tongue stuck to her teeth. "Sir," her voice came out thin as smoke. Nathaniel waited. His eyes were grey like winter sky, but not unkind. Mara opened her palm. The ribbon lay across it like a prayer. "I made this for your wedding day." She hummed the first few bars of the hymn, her perfect pitch finding every note clean and true. The melody hung in the warm air between them. Nathaniel took the ribbon gentle as handling glass. He studied the colored bars, the neat stitches that caught lamplight. "This is fine work. It's the hymn, sir. Each color is a note." Something shifted in his face. He held the ribbon up to the window where dawn leaked through the shutters. The pattern made sense now, a song made visible, a tune you could touch. "Keep that hymn for me till this evening," he said, tucking the ribbon into his coat pocket. Around them, the skillet hissed and steam from Tilda's herb jars sweetened the morning air. Mara felt warm all through, like standing close to the hearth. The veranda stretched wide under the afternoon sun. White tablecloth snapped in the breeze. Silver gleamed on china plates. The wedding guests had gathered for the rehearsal feast, ladies in silk the color of spring flowers, gentlemen with watch chains bright across their waistcoats. Mara carried the water pitcher from table to table, keeping her eyes down. She could feel the ribbon in Nathaniel's pocket, like it was still warm from her hands. Miss Eliza Morland sat at the head table, her golden hair swept high and pinned with pearls. She laughed at something her mother whispered, the sound sharp as breaking crystal. "Nathaniel, darling," Miss Eliza called as he approached. "Mother was just asking about your wedding gift to me." Nathaniel pulled out his chair. "I have something in mind." "Oh, do tell." Mrs. Morland leaned forward, her fan fluttering. "Is it diamonds?" "I do hope it's diamonds." Nathaniel's hand moved to his coat pocket. Mara held her breath. "Actually," he said, "I received a gift this morning that reminded me what tomorrow is truly about." He drew out the ribbon. It looked small in his large hand, but the colored threads caught sunlight like stained glass. The table fell quiet. Miss Eliza's smile went tight as piano wire. "What on earth is that?" she asked. "A ribbon, stitched to match a hymn." Nathaniel's voice carried warmth. "The craftsmanship is remarkable." "Who made it?" "Missus." Morland's fan snapped shut. Mara's hands trembled around the water pitcher. Every eye had found her. The weight of their stare pressed down like a stone. "One of the kitchen girls," Nathaniel said. Miss Eliza's laugh rang out over the veranda. "Oh, my dear, sweet Nathaniel, you can't be serious." She plucked the ribbon from his fingers and held it up like something that might bite. "This is slave trifling. Kitchen scraps sewn into nonsense." The guests tittered. Someone whispered behind a gloved hand. "Eliza," Nathaniel's voice warned. But Miss Eliza was not finished. She stood, the ribbon dangling from her fingers. "Really, darling, you must learn to distinguish between charity and sentiment. These people make little gewgaws to curry favor. It means nothing." The silence that followed was deeper than a well. Mara felt her face burn. The water pitcher grew heavy in her hands. Around the kitchen doors, the other servants had gone still as stones. Overseer Pike stepped forward from where he had been watching by the garden gate. His smile showed too many teeth. "Miss Eliza speaks truth. These girls got too much time for foolishness. I'll see it corrected." Nathaniel's jaw went tight. He reached for the ribbon, but Miss Eliza had already dropped it. It fluttered to the veranda boards like a wounded bird. Mara set down the pitcher and knelt to retrieve her work. The threads had caught a splinter, pulling one of the gold bars crooked. Her eyes stung, but she would not cry where they could see. "Keep that hymn for me," Nathaniel had said. She tucked the ribbon into her apron pocket and stood. The hymn rose in her chest, wordless and sure. Whatever they said, whatever they did, the melody belonged to her. It always had. The fever came at midnight like a thief. Mr. Grayson's breathing turned shallow and quick. His skin burned pale and dry. Cook sent for the doctor, but he was tending a birth 2 counties over. Tilda, the midwife, took charge. Her cabin behind the quarters was strung with drying herbs, feverfew and willow bark, chamomile and root of yellow dock. She filled her basket with brown bottles and bitter tonics, muttering prayers under her breath. Mara followed her through the night fog to the big house. The lamp in Mr. Grayson's room threw wild shadows on the walls. Nathaniel sat beside the bed, his father's hand limp in his own. "Pneumonia," Tilda whispered, feeling the old man's pulse. "Fever's got him bad." She unpacked her jars, measuring drops into a tin cup. The liquid looked black in the lamplight, and when she lifted it to Mr. Grayson's lips, he turned his head away. "Won't take it," she said. "Too bitter." Mara stepped forward. "Ma'am?" Tilda glanced at her. "Child, this ain't no place for— I remember something." Mara's voice was small but certain. "From the doctor's back room, when I dust his shelves. There was a paper with Latin words, about fever medicine." Nathaniel looked up sharp. "What kind of words?" Mara closed her eyes, calling back the dusty afternoon when she had cleaned the doctor's study. The paper had been tucked between 2 thick books, the Latin script neat and careful. She had traced each word with her finger, the way she traced hymn notes. "Cortex salicis cum mele temperandus," she recited. "Per horum singulum, donec febris subsidat." Tilda's eyebrows rose. "You sure about that?" "Yes, ma'am." "Willow bark with honey, measured every hour until the fever breaks." The midwife stared at her for a long moment. Then she reached for her honey jar and began to mix. The new potion went down easier, and within the hour, Mr. Grayson's breathing deepened. "Well, I'll be," Tilda murmured. "Child's got a memory like a steel trap." Nathaniel studied Mara with new eyes. "How do you remember such things?" She thought of the ribbon in her pocket, the hymn that mapped itself in colored thread. "I hear patterns, sir, in words, in music. They stay with me." By dawn, the fever had broken. Mr. Grayson slept peaceful and deep. Nathaniel walked Mara to the kitchen as the sun painted the sky pink. "That hymn you hum," he said. "Tell me about it." Mara glanced around. The yard was empty, save for a few chickens scratching in the dirt. "It's called Wade the Lantern Low. My mama taught it to me before." She did not finish. "Before the debt collectors came, before the family scattered like leaves." "Sing it for me." Mara shook her head. "The words ain't safe, sir." Nathaniel stopped walking. "Safe. Some hymns are just melodies when the wrong ears hear them." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "But when the right folks listen, they mean more." Before he could ask what she meant, Preacher Isaiah came around the corner of the house. He was a free man who traveled the county, holding services in woods and barns where enslaved people could gather. "Morning, Mr. Grayson," Isaiah said, touching his hat brim. Heard your father took ill. Better now, thanks be. Nathaniel gestured toward Mara. This young lady helped save his life. Isaiah's eyes found Mara's face. Something passed between them, a look she could not read. Did she now? The preacher's voice was careful. That's a blessing. Mara hummed the first bar of Wade the Lantern low, so soft only they could hear. Isaiah went very still. Indeed it is, he said quietly. Indeed it is. Ben, the old stable hand, found Nathaniel in the study that evening. The wedding rehearsal had ended badly, with Miss Eliza sharp-voiced and her mother making pointed comments about proper oversight of the help. Mr. Nathaniel, Ben said, his hat in his hands. Might I speak with you? Nathaniel looked up from his father's desk, where ledgers lay open. Numbers marched across the pages in neat columns, but something about them had been troubling him for weeks. What is it, Ben? The old man glanced toward the door, then stepped closer. It's about that ledger you've been studying, the one with Mr. Pike's writing. Nathaniel's pen stopped moving. What about it? Math don't add up right. Never has. Ben's voice dropped low. Look at page 47. The debt entries for the last 3 years. Nathaniel turned to the page. Pike's careful script recorded purchases of seed and supplies, payments to merchants, debts owed and satisfied. But as Ben pointed out, the columns, patterns emerged that made no sense. See here? Ben traced a line with his gnarled finger. Same debt paid twice. Different names, same amount, same date. Could be an error. Could be. But look at this. Ben flipped several pages back. Payment recorded for cotton seed in April, but we don't plant cotton on this land. Never have. Nathaniel studied the entries more carefully. The more he looked, the stranger they became. Payments to people he had never heard of, debts that appeared and vanished, numbers that shifted when Pike rewrote them. Ben, he said slowly, how long has this been going on? The old man's eyes were sad. Years, sir. Maybe since your mama died. Maybe since you went away to school and your daddy started, trusting Pike with the books. A chill ran down Nathaniel's spine. Are you saying he's been stealing? I'm saying the numbers lie. And when numbers lie, someone's getting rich off the difference. That night, Nathaniel sat alone in his study, with the ledgers spread before him. By lamplight, Pike's fraud became clear as daylight. False debts, imaginary purchases, money flowing out of the estate and into the overseer's pocket. But it was worse than simple theft. On the last page, tucked between entries for horse feed and fence repair, he found something that made his blood run cold. A note in Pike's hand. M. Reassigned to quarters, age 6, per agreement with E. M. Family. Inheritance protected as discussed. M. Mara. Reassigned. At age 6. Nathaniel remembered his mother's last illness, the confusion of those final weeks. Had someone taken advantage? Had a child been moved from the main house to the slave quarters to hide something? He thought of Mara's perfect memory, her uncanny knowledge of Latin, the way she carried herself with a dignity that seemed bred in the bone. He thought of the ribbon, stitched with the precision of a lady's needlework. And he thought of his signet ring, heavy on his finger, bearing the Grayson seal that had marked family documents for 3 generations. The chapel stood ready for tomorrow's wedding. White flowers filled every corner. Ribbons hung from the pews like streamers of light. The guests would gather at noon, and by evening he would be bound to Miss Eliza Morland. But tonight, Nathaniel stood on the chapel porch with a different purpose. The ledger lay open in his hands. Preacher Isaiah waited beside him, his face grave in the lantern light. "Read it again," Nathaniel said. Isaiah's voice was steady. M. Reassigned to quarters, age 6, per agreement with E.M. Family. Inheritance protected as discussed. E.M. Eliza Morland. Or her family. Yes. Nathaniel closed the ledger. The weight of it seemed to crush his chest. They moved her, a 6-year-old child. Moved her from the main house to the quarters and called her enslaved to protect some inheritance scheme. It would seem so. But whose child is she really? Isaiah was quiet for a long moment. Maybe we've been asking the wrong question. What do you mean? You've been wondering who she belongs to. Maybe the question is, who does she belong with? Nathaniel thought of Mara's face when Miss Eliza mocked her gift, the dignity in her silence. The way she held her head high even as the ribbon fluttered to the ground. What should I do? What does your conscience tell you? The question hung in the night air. From the quarters came the sound of voices singing a low, mournful tune that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Mara's voice rose above the rest, pure and clear. "Wade the lantern low," she sang. "Wade the lantern low. There's a better day a-coming when the harvest time is nigh." Nathaniel's hand moved to his coat pocket where the ribbon lay mended and folded. Tomorrow, he was supposed to pledge his life to a woman who called kindness trifling and cruelty correction. But tonight, under the chapel stars, he felt the pull of a different kind of vow. "Isaiah," he said quietly, "what do you know about that hymn?" The preacher's eyes glinted. "I know some hymns are more than songs." "Meaning?" "Meaning tomorrow's wedding might not be the only promise that needs keeping." Dawn came grey and uncertain. Wedding guests stirred in their rooms, but the house felt hollow. Mr. Grayson slept fitful in his fever bed. In the kitchen, Cook measured flour with shaking hands. Mara sat on her stool by the window, the mended ribbon spread across her palm. The pulled thread had left a gap in the pattern, but somehow the melody still sang true. Preacher Isaiah appeared in the doorway. "Child, walk with me." They crossed the yard to his wagon, where quilts and Bibles lay stacked under oiled canvas. Isaiah pulled out a piece of paper covered with musical notes. "This is Wade the Lantern Low," he said, spreading the sheet music on the wagon tailgate. "As it's written proper." Mara studied the notes. "That ain't how Mama taught it." "No, your Mama taught you something different. Something older." Isaiah's voice dropped low. "Sing it for me. All the verses you know." Mara glanced around the empty yard, then began. Her voice rose soft and steady. "Wade the lantern low, wade the lantern low. There's a better day a-coming when the harvest time is nigh. Follow the drinking gourd, follow the drinking gourd. The river runs to freedom, if you know the way to try." Isaiah nodded. Second verse. "Cross where willows bend. Cross where willows bend. 3 white stones will mark the place where the ferryman will wait. Sing beneath the stars, sing beneath the stars. The cypress knows your yearning and will guide you to the gate." Third verse. "Knock on the painted door, knock on the painted door. The lamp burns in the window for the traveler in the night. Rest until the dawn, rest until the dawn, then wade the lantern low until you reach the morning light." Isaiah folded the music. "Child, that ain't just a hymn, that's a map." Mara's heart jumped like a rabbit. "Sir, your mama didn't just teach you a song. She taught you a route." Isaiah's eyes were serious as stone. "Every verse tells travelers where to go, how to find safe passage." The ribbon in her hands suddenly made sense. The colored bars weren't just melody, they were directions. Blue for water crossings, gold for lantern signals, red for sanctuary. "The Underground Railroad," she whispered. "Some call it that, but I ain't running. This is my home." Isaiah's hand settled gentle on her shoulder. "Maybe home is bigger than this place. Maybe your mama knew that someday you'd need to know the way." A horse thundered into the yard. Overseer Pike swung down from his saddle, his face dark with anger. Behind him rode 2 men Mara didn't recognize patrollers by their hard eyes and ready whips. "Preacher," Pike called, "you got business here?" Isaiah stepped in front of Mara. "Come to offer prayers for Mr. Grayson's healing." "Well, you can pray somewhere else. We got troubles brewing. Runaway slaves spotted 2 counties over. Might be heading this way." The patrollers dismounted. One of them studied Mara with cold interest. "This one look familiar, Pike." Pike's eyes narrowed. "Should she?" "Girl they're hunting is about this age. Light-skinned, good with needlework." Mara's blood turned to ice water. The ribbon in her hands felt like evidence, like guilt made visible. "This girl ain't run nowhere," Pike said. "Been here all her life. You sure about that?" Pike's gaze shifted between Mara and the patroller. Something ugly moved behind his eyes. "Sure as I can be. But if there's doubt—" "No doubt," Nathaniel's voice cut across the yard. He strode from the house, still in his nightshirt but carrying himself like he owned the world. "This girl has been under my personal protection since childhood." The patroller touched his hat brim. "Mr. Grayson, didn't mean to disturb you. See that you don't." Nathaniel's voice was ice over steel. "Now, I believe you gentlemen have business elsewhere." The men mounted up and rode out. Pike lingered, His face twisted with frustration. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Nathaniel," he said. "Girl like that gets ideas above her station, causes trouble. The only trouble I see is men with nothing better to do than terrorize children." Pike spat in the dirt and stalked toward the stables. Isaiah gathered his music with quick hands. "Mr. Grayson," the preacher said carefully, "might I speak with you privately?" They walked to the garden where roses bloomed against a white trellis. Mara followed at a distance, her ears sharp. "That hymn the child sings," Isaiah said. "You asked about it yesterday." "I did. It's more than music. It's a guide, a map of safe passage for those who need to travel at night." Nathaniel stopped walking. "You mean the Underground Railroad? I mean Mercy wearing the face of melody. And Mara knows this map. Her mama taught it to her, every verse, every crossing, every safe house between here and freedom." Nathaniel's hand moved to his coat pocket, where the ribbon lay hidden. "The pattern she stitched. Is that part of it?" "Could be. Some conductors use different signs, quilts hanging on lines, colored scarves tied to fence posts." Isaiah's voice was careful. "Ribbons sewn to match a song. God in heaven." Nathaniel breathed. "She made me a map to freedom, or a reminder of what freedom looks like when someone small offers it to someone powerful." They stood quiet among the roses. Bees hummed in the morning heat. From the house came sounds of wedding preparation, servants rushing, furniture moving, silver being polished for the feast. "Isaiah," Nathaniel said, "finally, if that ledger I showed you is true, if she was moved from the main house as a child, then she might not be enslaved at all, legally speaking. But Pike has papers, bills of sale. Papers can be forged, bills can be bought." Isaiah plucked a white rose and studied its petals. "But blood tells its own story, and so do seals." Nathaniel pulled his signet ring from his finger. The Grayson seal was carved deep in the gold, a 5-petaled rose with careful detail around each edge. "This ring has marked our family documents for 50 years, he said. "Then any paper claiming to own that child should bear the same mark, unless it's false." The church bell tolled the hour. Wedding guests would begin arriving soon. Miss Eliza would expect her groom to be dressed and waiting, but Nathaniel's mind was elsewhere, following a ribbon map toward truth. The storm came up sudden, as summer storms do. Black clouds rolled in from the west, bringing wind that bent trees and rain that hammered the roof like shot. The wedding guests huddled in the parlor, their fine clothes wilted by humidity. Miss Eliza paced before the window, her silk dress rustling with each sharp turn. "This is intolerable," she snapped. "How are we supposed to proceed in such weather?" Her mother fanned herself with irritated sweeps. "Perhaps we should postpone until tomorrow." "Absolutely not, Mrs. Morland declared. "The arrangements are made. The guests have traveled. We proceed as planned." But the storm had other ideas. Lightning split the sky, and thunder shook the windows. Rain turned the roads to mud and the churchyard to a lake. In the quarters, Mara sat by her small window and watched water pour from the gutters. The ribbon lay on her lap, its pattern memorized but still mysterious. How could colored thread hold directions? How could a song become a map? A soft knock came at her door. Tilda, the midwife, slipped inside, her apron wet with rain. "Child, we need to talk." Tilda sat on the narrow bed, her face serious in the lamplight. "That hymn you sing. Wade the lantern low. How much of it do you know?" "All of it, ma'am," Mama made sure. "Your mama was wise. That song saved more lives than any medicine I ever mixed." Mara's eyes widened. "You know about the map?" "I know about freedom routes, know about safe houses and ferry crossings, know about children who disappear from their beds one night and show up free in Philadelphia or Boston." "Is that what Mama wanted?" "For me to run?" Tilda's weathered hand covered Mara's small one. "Maybe your mama wanted you to have choices, to know that walls ain't forever and roads lead somewhere better." Thunder crashed overhead, and both women jumped. In the distance, a bell began to ring, not the church bell, but the plantation bell that called alarm. Tilda rose and peered through the window. "That's Pike's signal. Something's wrong." They wrapped themselves in shawls and splashed across the flooded yard. In the big house, chaos reigned. Mr. Grayson had taken another turn for the worse. His fever spiked and his breathing went shallow. "Where's the doctor?" Nathaniel demanded. "Still 2 counties away," Cook said. "Roads are washed out." Tilda pushed past the hovering servants and knelt beside the bed. "Mister." Grayson's skin was grey as ash, and his pulse fluttered weak as a moth wing. "This ain't the same fever," she murmured. "This is something different." She began mixing tonics, but her hands shook. Whatever was wrong with the old man, it was beyond her simple remedies. Mara stepped forward. "Ma'am, might I try something?" All eyes turned to her. Miss Eliza, who had been weeping delicately into her handkerchief, looked up with red eyes. "What could a slave child possibly—" "Eliza," Nathaniel's voice was sharp. "Let her speak." Mara approached the bed with careful steps. "Mister." Grayson's breathing was rapid and shallow, like a bird caught in a trap. She placed her small hand on his forehead and felt the fever's heat. Then she began to sing. Not Wade the Lantern Low, but something older and simpler. A lullaby her mother had sung when sickness visited their cabin years ago. "Sleep now, sleep deep, let healing waters flow. Peace, be still, the storm will go." Her voice was barely a whisper, but something in the melody seemed to reach through Mr. Grayson's delirium. His breathing slowed, his rigid muscles relaxed. Miss Eliza stared open-mouthed. "How is she doing that?" "Music has power," Isaiah said quietly from the doorway. "Some say certain melodies can calm the spirit when medicine fails." Mara sang for an hour while the storm raged outside. Gradually, Mr. Grayson's color improved. His breathing deepened. When she finally stopped, he slept peaceful and natural. "Well, I never," Tilda breathed. "Child's got a gift for healing." Nathaniel knelt beside Mara's chair. "How did you know that song would help?" "I didn't know, sir. I just felt called to sing it." Something passed between them, a recognition of mystery, of powers beyond understanding. Outside, the storm began to weaken. Lightning moved further off, and the rain gentled to a steady whisper. But in that quiet room, beside a sleeping man whose life had been touched by a child's song, the real storm was just beginning to build. The storm left the roads impassable, but it also left something else: time. Time to think, time to question, time to search. While the wedding guests fretted in the parlor and Miss Eliza grew sharp with frustration, Nathaniel and Isaiah made their way to the estate's record room. Papers molded in wooden crates. Ledgers stretched back decades. Somewhere in that dusty maze lay the truth about Mara's past. They worked by lamplight, reading through bills of sale and property transfers. The deeper they dug, the stranger the story became. "Here," Isaiah said, pulling out a folder tied with faded ribbon. 1847, the year your mother died. Nathaniel took the papers with careful hands. His mother's death had been sudden, a fever that took her in 3 days. He had been away at school, returning only for the funeral. The documents told a different story. Medical bills, payments to a wet nurse, records of a child's care. "A baby," Nathaniel whispered. "There was a baby born just before Mother died. What happened to it?" Nathaniel flipped through more papers. "Here, transfer of custody to someone named Mary, a house servant." "That was Mara's mama," a voice said from the doorway. They turned to find Ben, the old stable hand, dripping rainwater from his coat. "You know about this?" Nathaniel asked. Ben nodded sadly. "I knew Mary. Good woman. She lost her own baby the winter before stillborn. When your mama died and left that little girl, Mary stepped in to nurse her." "What little girl? Where did she come from?" Ben's eyes were haunted. "Mr. Nathaniel, some truths are hard to bear. Tell me." The old man sat heavily on a crate. "Your mama. She took up with someone. After your daddy got distant with his drinking and his business, someone who made her feel alive again." Nathaniel's world tilted. "She had an affair. She had a child, a daughter, born the same week she died from the birthing fever. And the father?" Ben shook his head. "Never said. But that little girl had the Grayson look about her. Light eyes, careful hands, a mind sharp as a steel blade." Isaiah leaned forward. "What happened then?" "Pike convinced your daddy that the child was a burden, a reminder of shameful things. Said it would be better if she was raised in the quarters, called enslaved, kept from causing talk. And my father agreed. Your daddy was half mad with grief and whiskey." Pike had already been stealing from the estate. One more lie on the pile didn't seem to matter. Nathaniel's hands shook as he held the papers. So she's my sister. My half-sister. By blood, yes. By law. Ben shrugged. Pike made sure the papers called her property. Made sure no one would look too close. But the will, Mother's will would have provided for her. Pike saw to that too. Had the lawyer changed things while your daddy was too grief-struck to notice, made it seem like the child never existed. Thunder rolled in the distance, and rain continued its steady drumming. In the lamplight, the truth lay spread across dusty papers like bones in a grave. Nathaniel rose and walked to the window. Outside, through sheets of rain, he could see the quarters where Mara slept. His sister, enslaved by lies and legal tricks. There has to be proof, he said. Something Pike couldn't forge or hide. Isaiah gathered the papers. What about your mother's personal effects? Jewelry? Letters? Private things? Stored in the attic. I haven't been up there since. Since she died, I understand. Isaiah's voice was gentle. But if there's evidence, that's where it would be. Ben stood, water still, dripping from his coat. Mr. Nathaniel, there's something else you should know. What? Miss Eliza's family, the Morlands, they knew about this. Pike told them years ago, when they first started talking about your marriage. They knew about Mara? They knew about the inheritance that should have been split, knew about the sister who could claim part of the estate. Ben's voice was bitter. Why do you think they were so eager for this wedding? Why do you think they've been pushing so hard for you to marry quick and legal? Nathaniel felt sick. Because if the truth comes out, then Miss Eliza's dowry goes from half the estate to a quarter, maybe less, if courts decide to investigate how much Pike stole over the years. The room spun around Nathaniel like a child's top. His wedding, his bride, his sister, all connected by greed and lies. Outside, the storm was passing, but inside, the real tempest was just beginning. By evening, the roads had drained enough for careful travel. Miss Eliza announced that the wedding would proceed as planned the next morning, weather or no weather. I will not be denied my day, she declared, her voice pitched high with strain. But Nathaniel was elsewhere, climbing narrow stairs to the attic where his mother's memory waited in dust and shadows. The space under the roof was close and warm. Trunks lined the walls like sleeping animals. Nathaniel lit a lamp and began to search through his mother's things, dresses wrapped in tissue, books marked with pressed flowers, letters tied with ribbon. At the bottom of the largest trunk, beneath a wedding gown gone yellow with age, he found a wooden box with his mother's initials carved in the lid. Inside lay treasures, a locket with his baby picture, a pressed rose from her wedding bouquet, a small Bible with gilt edges and pages soft as cloth, and there, tucked between the Bible's pages, a folded paper with writing in his mother's careful hand, "For my daughter, born of love and claimed by grace. May she know her worth and find her way to freedom. The blood of Graysons runs in her veins, and no earthly law can make that untrue." Below the note was a sketch, a baby's face with careful attention to detail. Light eyes, a small chin, features that would grow into the face he knew, Mara's face. But it was what lay beneath the sketch that made Nathaniel's heart race. A piece of parchment marked with wax, bearing the impression of his signet ring. The seal was perfect, every petal of the rose, every edge of the design pressed clear and deep. It was a birth certificate, legal and binding, recognizing the child as a Grayson heir. "Dear God," he whispered. Footsteps creaked on the attic stairs. Nathaniel quickly folded the papers and slipped them into his coat as Pike's head appeared through the opening. "Mr. Nathaniel? Thought I heard someone up here. Just looking through Mother's things, preparing for tomorrow." Pike's eyes glinted in the lamplight. "Find anything interesting?" "Memories, nothing more." But Pike was studying the open trunk, the scattered contents. His gaze lingered on the wooden box in Nathaniel's lap. "Wedding nerves can make a man sentimental," Pike said carefully. "Make him see things that ain't there, remember things different than they were." There was threat in his voice, quiet but clear. Nathaniel felt the papers crinkle against his chest. "Indeed they can," he said. "A man might even start questioning his choices, wondering if he's marrying for the right reasons." Pike's smile was sharp as a blade. "Too late for wondering now. Contracts signed. Debts called in. Your daddy's medicine costs money, Mr. Nathaniel. The Morland dowry is the only thing standing between this estate and ruin. Is that so? That's gospel. Pike's voice dropped low. And gospels ain't for questioning. They're for believing. He disappeared down the stairs, leaving Nathaniel alone with his lamp and his mother's legacy. Outside, the last of the storm clouds moved off toward the east, taking their thunder with them. But in Nathaniel's chest, a different kind of storm was gathering force. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and false bright. Dew sparkled on the grass like scattered diamonds. Birds sang in the oak trees, and the air smelled of rain-washed earth and blooming roses. But in the big house, shadows moved wrong. Mr. Grayson woke with his fever broken but his memory sharp. He called for Nathaniel before the sun was fully up, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "Son, we need to talk." Nathaniel sat beside the bed, the papers from his mother's box hidden in his coat. "How are you feeling?" Clear-headed for the first time in months. The old man's eyes were bright and focused. "That child singing last night. It was like your mother was in the room. She does have a gift. More than a gift. Mr. Grayson struggled to sit up. "I've been remembering things. About the year your mother died. About the baby." Nathaniel's heart jumped. "What about the baby?" "I was sick with grief and whiskey then. Let Pike handle things I should have handled myself. Made decisions I should never have made." "What kind of decisions, Mr.?" Grayson's face was heavy with regret. "There was a child, Nathaniel. Your mother's child. I was so hurt, so angry about her. Her friendship with another man. I let Pike convince me to hide the truth." "Hide how?" "Called the child enslaved. Gave her to Mary to raise in the quarters. Told myself it was better that way. Less scandal." The room was quiet except for the tick of the mantel clock. Outside, wedding guests were already stirring, preparing for the day's celebration. "Father," Nathaniel said carefully. "Who was the child's father?" The old man's eyes filled with tears. "I never asked, couldn't bear to know. But looking at that girl now, the way she carries herself, the intelligence in her eyes." He gripped Nathaniel's hand. "She's a Grayson. I see it plain as daylight. What are you saying?" "I'm saying I made a terrible mistake, and Pike helped me make it for his own reasons." A knock came at the door. Miss Eliza swept in without waiting for permission, her wedding dress rustling behind her like the wings of an angry swan. "Nathaniel, darling, you're needed downstairs. The musicians have arrived, and Mother is quite beside herself about the seating arrangements." She stopped short when she saw Mr. Grayson sitting up, his eyes clear and focused. "Oh, you're better. Much better. Thank you." His voice was cool. "Well enough to remember certain conversations we've had over the years." Something flickered in Miss Eliza's eyes. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean. I'm sure you do." The silence stretched taut as piano wire. Outside, a carriage rolled up the drive, bringing more guests for the morning ceremony. "Well," Miss Eliza said brightly, "we can discuss old times after the wedding. Right now, we have a celebration to attend to." She swept out in a cloud of silk and lavender water, but her departure left the room feeling colder. "Son, Mr. Grayson said quietly, "there are things about this marriage that maybe I should have told you sooner." "What things?" "The Morlands didn't just agree to this match for love. They know about Pike's irregularities, know about the missing money, know about the child." Nathaniel's blood went cold. "They know about Mara. They know she could have a legal claim to part of this estate. That's why they've been pushing for a quick wedding. Once you're married to Eliza, her family gains control over the property. Any inconvenient claims can be handled. Handled? How? Papers can be destroyed. Children can disappear, especially children whose legal status is complicated." The threat was clear. Nathaniel felt the birth certificate crinkle against his chest. If the Morlands knew the truth, Mara was in danger. "Father, what if I told you I found proof? Legal proof of her parentage?" Mr. Grayson's eyes sharpened. "What kind of proof?" Nathaniel pulled out the folded papers. Mother's notes, a birth certificate, sealed with our family ring. The old man took the documents with shaking hands. As he read, his face went pale. Dear God in heaven, she knew, and she tried to protect the child. But Pike hid it. Pike stole it, just like he stole everything else. Mr. Grayson struggled to stand. "Son, you can't marry that girl. Not today, not ever. The guests are here." The contracts are signed. Contracts can be broken. Guests can go home disappointed. The old man's voice grew strong. But some wrongs can't be undone once they're done. And some lies get too big to ever make right. A commotion erupted in the yard outside. Voices shouting, horses thundering. Nathaniel rushed to the window and saw Pike directing a group of men toward the quarters. "Patrollers?" Mr. Grayson said, grimly. Pike must have sent word, claiming runaway activity. Nathaniel's heart raced. "They're after Mara. Then you better get to her first." The quarters were in chaos. Doors slammed shut as families huddled inside their cabins. Dogs barked and children cried. Pike's voice rang out over the confusion, directing the patrollers like pieces on a chessboard. "Search every building. Check every hiding place. Someone's been helping runaways, and we're going to find out who." Nathaniel ran toward Mara's cabin, but Pike stepped into his path. "Mr. Nathaniel, shouldn't you be getting ready for your wedding? Where is she? Who? Don't play games with me, Pike." The overseer's smile was cold. "The girl? Oh, she's safe. Real safe. Locked up tight until we can sort out some irregularities in her papers." "What irregularities?" "Seems there's some question about her ownership. Some suggestion she might have been involved in helping runaways." "Can't have that kind of uncertainty on a wedding day." Rage filled Nathaniel's chest like fire. "Release her. Now." "I'm afraid that's not possible. See, once patrollers get involved, legal process has to run its course." Pike's voice was silk over steel. "Could take days, weeks. Might be she'll need to be sold south before it's all sorted out. You can't sell her. She's not property. According to the papers I have, she surely is." Pike pulled out a folded document. "Bill of sale, clear as daylight. Signed and sealed legal." Nathaniel snatched the paper and studied it by morning light. Pike's forged seal was good, but not perfect. The wax was the wrong color, too red, where the Grayson seal had always been golden, and the edges of the rose petals were blurred, lacking the crisp detail of the original. "This is a forgery. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Nathaniel. Hope you can prove it." "I can." Nathaniel pulled out his signet ring and the birth certificate from his mother's box. "This is the real Grayson seal. Look at the difference." Pike's eyes went wide when he saw the birth certificate, but his recovery was quick. "Interesting. But my papers are already filed with the county, legally recorded. Your document there could be called into question, might even be seen as an attempt to forge freedom papers." The trap was perfect. Pike had legally recorded his lies, while the truth remained hidden in an attic trunk. In the eyes of the law, Mara belonged to the estate, and the estate belonged to whoever controlled its debts. "You planned this," Nathaniel said. "The wedding, the patrollers, everything. I plan to protect this estate from ruinous sentiment. Your daddy's been sick, you've been distracted, and that girl's been filling your head with nonsense. Time to restore order." More carriages rolled up the drive. Wedding guests in their finest clothes come to witness the joining of two prominent families. Among them, Nathaniel spotted a familiar black coat. "Judge Carter," he called. The judge approached, his face curious. "Nathaniel, shouldn't you be preparing for the ceremony?" "Your Honor, I need your legal opinion on a matter of documentation." Nathaniel spread both papers on a nearby barrel, Pike's forged bill of sale and his mother's birth certificate. "Which of these documents appears legally valid?" Judge Carter studied both papers carefully, holding them up to the light, examining the seals and signatures. Around them, the commotion in the quarters continued, but the judge's attention was focused entirely on the documents. "Interesting," he murmured. "Very interesting indeed." Pike shifted nervously. "Your Honor, we're dealing with a runaway situation here. Legal niceties can wait." "Legal niceties," Judge Carter said mildly, "are what separate civilization from chaos." He pointed to Pike's document. "This seal, for instance. The wax appears fresh, despite the age claimed on the paper, and the impression lacks the detail I would expect from an original die." "What are you saying?" Pike's voice was tight. "I'm saying this bill of sale appears to be falsified." "Recently," the judge turned to the birth certificate. "This document, however, bears all the hallmarks of authenticity. Age-appropriate wear, correct paper stock for the period, and a seal impression that matches known examples of the Grayson family die." Pike's face went gray. That's impossible. What's impossible is that you thought you could fool a man who's been examining legal documents for 30 years. Judge Carter's voice was stern. Mr. Pike, I'm ordering you to release the child immediately and submit to questioning about the authenticity of your records. I ain't submitting to nothing. Pike snarled. He whistled sharp and shrill. The patrollers turned from their search and began moving toward them, hands on their weapons. But they had reckoned without the quarters themselves. Doors opened and people emerged, men and women who had suffered under Pike's cruelty for years. They formed a quiet circle around the group, saying nothing, but making their presence felt. Among them stood Preacher Isaiah, his Bible in his hands, and his voice lifted in song. Wade the lantern low, wade the lantern low, there's a better day a-coming when the harvest time is nigh. Other voices joined in. The hymn rose from a dozen throats, then 20, then more. The patrollers found themselves surrounded by singing people, and something about the sound made their weapons feel heavy in their hands. In the center of the circle, Judge Carter continued his examination of the documents. Mr. Pike, in light of this evidence, I hereby declare your bill of sale null and void. The child known as Mara is to be released immediately and recognized as a free person under the law. You can't do that, Pike protested. She's property. Always has been. She's a human being. Always has been. The judge's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. And anyone who continues to claim otherwise will answer to this court. The singing continued, voices blending in harmony that seemed to rise from the earth itself. And through the crowd came a small figure in a simple grey dress. Mara. She walked with her head high, her eyes clear, carrying herself with the dignity that had always marked her as different. In her hands, she held something small and bright. Nathaniel's signet ring. I believe this belongs to you, sir, she said, offering the ring to Nathaniel. He knelt to her height, bringing his eyes level with hers. No, Mara, I gave that to you as a promise to protect you and see justice done. Then keep your promise by taking it back. I don't need a ring to know I'm free. Around them, the hymn swelled. Judge Carter folded the papers and handed the birth certificate back to Nathaniel. Pike stood silent, his face twisted with defeat, and from the big house came the sound of carriages departing as wedding guests, sensing the day had taken an unexpected turn, quietly made their excuses and departed. The wedding, it seemed, would not be taking place after all. The chapel porch was quiet in the afternoon sun. Most of the wedding guests had departed, their carriages disappearing down the muddy road like ships retreating from an unexpected shore. Inside the chapel, white flowers wilted in their vases, and ribbons hung like broken promises. But on the porch, a different kind of ceremony was taking place. Nathaniel stood before the gathered remnant family, servants, neighbors who had stayed to witness whatever truth was emerging from the wreckage of the planned wedding. Judge Carter held his Bible ready, and Preacher Isaiah waited with quiet dignity. Miss Eliza sat in a chair her mother had brought from their carriage, her wedding dress spread around her like spilled milk. Her face was pale with shock and dark with fury. This is madness, she said for the third time. Complete madness. This is justice, Nathaniel replied. Something that should have been done 12 years ago. Mr. Grayson, supported by Tilda's steady arm, stepped forward. His voice was weak but clear. Let the record show that I, William Grayson, acknowledge my grievous error in allowing a child of this household to be falsely enslaved. Let it further show that I hereby recognize Mara as my stepdaughter and legal heir to her rightful portion of this estate. Judge Carter made notes in his ledger. Witnessed and recorded. Furthermore, Mr. Grayson continued, I nullify all debts and obligations incurred through the falsified documents of one Henry Pike, and I order a full audit of estate finances to restore what was stolen. Pike, now under guard by the sheriff, said nothing. His face was stone, but his eyes burned with defeated rage. Miss Eliza rose from her chair, her dress rustling like autumn leaves. And what of our marriage contract? What of the agreements between our families? What agreements? Nathaniel asked. The ones based on concealing fraud? The ones that required me to ignore theft and overlook the enslavement of my own sister? Sister! Mrs. Morland's fan snapped shut. That's quite an accusation. It's quite a truth. Nathaniel held up the birth certificate. Legal, documented, and sealed. Mara is my half-sister, daughter of my mother and heir to a portion of this estate. A very convenient discovery, Miss Eliza said coldly. Just in time to avoid a marriage that would have solved all your financial problems. The only financial problems we had were caused by Pike's theft. With him gone and the books set right, this estate will prosper again. Miss Eliza's eyes were hard as flint. And you truly believe you can build a life on the foundation of this? She gestured toward Mara, who stood quietly beside Isaiah. You'll be ruined socially. No decent family will associate with you. Then we'll find new associations. Better ones. You're making a mistake, Nathaniel. A terrible mistake. I'm correcting one. Finally. Miss Eliza gathered her skirts and swept toward her family's carriage, but at the porch steps she turned back. Mark my words, she said, her voice carrying across the yard. This isn't over. There are ways to challenge questionable documents. Ways to prove fraud and conspiracy. Are you threatening us? Nathaniel asked. I'm promising you. Her smile was sharp as a knife blade. No one makes a fool of the Morland family. No one. She climbed into the carriage, and her mother followed. Within moments, they were gone, leaving only dust and the scent of expensive perfume. Judge Carter closed his ledger. Well, that's that. The legal proceedings are complete. Miss Mara is hereby recognized as a free person and heir. Mr. Pike will face charges for fraud and forgery. And the Morland marriage contract is declared null and void. A cheer went up from the assembled crowd. People who had lived under Pike's cruel authority for years finally dared to celebrate. Children ran between the adults, laughing and calling to each other in voices no longer hushed by fear. But Mara stood apart, her face thoughtful. Nathaniel approached her carefully. How are you feeling? She considered the question. Different, but not changed, if that makes sense. Perfect sense. I always knew I was free inside. Now I just have papers to prove it. Isaiah joined them on the porch. Child, what will you do now? You could go north. Start fresh where no one knows your history. Mara looked around at the faces surrounding her. Tilda, the midwife, Ben, the stable hand, Cook with her flour-dusted apron, dozens of others who had been family in all but law. This is my home, she said simply. These are my people. Why would I leave? Some might say you should distance yourself from the place of your enslavement. Some might say that, but this place isn't just where I was enslaved. It's where I learned to sing, where I found my gift for healing, where I discovered that sometimes the smallest offering can change everything. She pulled the mended ribbon from her pocket and held it up to catch the afternoon light. The colored threads still sang their silent song, mapping paths to freedom for any who knew how to read them. Besides, she added with a small smile, someone needs to teach the proper verses to wade the lantern low. The world's got too many people singing it wrong. Isaiah laughed, a sound rich and warm as honey. Child, I think you're going to do just fine. As evening approached, the crowd began to disperse. Families returned to their cabins, neighbors hitched up their wagons for the ride home, and the excitement of the day settled into something deeper and more lasting. Judge Carter packed his documents and prepared to depart. Mr. Grayson, he said to Nathaniel, you'll need to file updated papers with the county. New deeds, revised wills, financial disclosures. I'll handle it. See that you do. Clean books make for clean consciences. The judge climbed into his buggy and drove away, leaving Nathaniel and Mara alone on the chapel porch as shadows lengthened across the yard. I have something for you, Nathaniel said. He pulled a small package from his coat, a length of golden ribbon, finer than silk and bright as sunlight. This isn't a gift from master to slave, he said, tying it gently around her wrist. This is a gift from brother to sister. A token of protection and respect. Mara touched the ribbon with careful fingers. It's beautiful. And this, he added, pressing his signet ring into her palm, is yours by right of birth. Not because I give it, but because you've earned it. She looked at the ring, heavy with history and meaning. What am I supposed to do with it? Whatever you think best. Wear it, hide it, melt it down, and make something new. It's yours to choose. Mara closed her fingers around the ring. For the first time all day, she smiled, really smiled, with joy that reached her eyes. I think I'll keep it. Pass it on someday to someone who needs to know they matter. Good choice. They sat together on the porch steps as night fell around them. From the quarters came the sound of singing, not the coded hymns of escape, but the open songs of celebration. Voices blended in harmony under the stars, and somewhere among them, Mara's perfect pitch found its place in the chorus. "Nathaniel," she said quietly. "Yes, thank you for seeing me, for listening to my song. Thank you for singing it." The lanterns in the quarters began to glow, one by one, like earthbound stars. And in the big house behind them, lights appeared in the windows as Tilda helped Mr. Grayson to his evening rest, his fever finally broken and his conscience finally clear. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, legal procedures, financial adjustments, the delicate work of rebuilding trust and establishing justice. But tonight, under the vast canopy of southern stars, a family sat together on a porch and listened to the sound of freedom being born. 3 months after the wedding that never was, autumn painted the estate in shades of gold and crimson. The cotton fields lay harvested, the corn stood in neat shocks, and smoke rose from chimneys where families prepared for winter. But the changes ran deeper than seasons. In the big house, Nathaniel worked at his father's desk, copying numbers into a new ledger with careful script. The columns were clean now, honest. Pike's false entries had been removed, his stolen money recovered where possible, and the true accounts of the estate laid bare. They were not wealthy, but they were solvent. More importantly, they were free, free from lies, free from theft, free from the weight of unacknowledged sin. A soft knock came at the study door. Mara entered carrying a tea tray, her movements graceful in a blue dress that had been her mother's, altered to fit. "Tilda thought you might need refreshment," she said, setting the tray on a cleared space of the desk. "Thank you." Nathaniel rubbed his eyes, tired from hours of detailed work. "How is father today?" "Better. He sat in the garden this morning and helped Ben plan next year's planting." She poured tea from the china pot, adding honey the way he preferred. "The doctor says his heart is stronger. It should be. The weight he's been carrying is finally lifted." Mara settled into the chair across from the desk. She wore the golden ribbon around her wrist like a bracelet, and the signet ring on a chain around her neck. Both caught lamplight as she moved. "I've been thinking about something," she said. "What's that?" "The song weighed the lantern low. It was always about freedom, but I wonder if we understood it wrong." Nathaniel leaned back in his chair. "How so?" "We thought it was about running away, following secret paths to escape bondage. But maybe," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "maybe it's about finding freedom where you are, about wading through darkness until you reach the light on the other side. And the lantern? The truth, the courage to speak it, the willingness to carry it even when it's dangerous." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "You may be right. You certainly carried that lantern for all of us. We all did. You, me, Isaiah, even your father when he finally remembered what mattered." She sipped her tea, steam curling up from the cup. "The lantern was always there. We just had to learn how to see it." From the yard came the sound of children playing, a dozen young voices calling and laughing as they chased each other between the oak trees. Some were the children of free servants now paid wages for their work. Others belonged to neighbors who had come to see how the estate ran under its new principles. The transformation had not been easy. Some families had left, seeking employment elsewhere rather than adjust to the changed order. Others had stayed, drawn by the promise of fair wages and respectful treatment. New people had arrived, too skilled workers attracted by reports of an estate where ability mattered more than skin color. "Speaking of changes," Mara said, "Isaiah wants to speak with you about the school." "What about it?" "He's found 3 more families willing to send their children. We'll need another teacher soon." The school had been Isaiah's idea, but Mara had made it reality. She taught reading and writing to any child who wanted to learn, using the old church building that had been cleaned and repaired for the purpose. Her perfect memory and natural patience made her an ideal instructor. "What does he suggest?" "There's a young woman in town, Miss Sarah Patterson. She's educated and willing, but—" Mara hesitated. "But?" "Her family isn't sure about the propriety of teaching mixed classes." It was still a delicate matter. The estate's transformation had been legal and documented, but social acceptance was slower to achieve. Some neighbors watched with approval, others with suspicion, and a few with outright hostility. "Invite her to visit. Nathaniel said. Let her see for herself what we're building here. And if she refuses, then we'll find someone else. Or you'll continue alone until we do. Mara smiled. I don't mind the work. Those children learn faster than rain soaks ground. Including little Thomas? Thomas was the son of the new blacksmith, a boy of 8 who had arrived unable to read his own name. Under Mara's patient instruction, he now devoured any book placed in front of him. Especially Thomas. He read through the entire Gospel of Matthew yesterday and asked if we had any books about science. We'll find him some. Intelligence deserves cultivation, regardless of where it sprouts. Another knock interrupted them. This time it was Cook, her face flushed with excitement. Mr. Nathaniel, Miss Mara, you need to come quick. There's visitors on the front drive. They followed her to the front parlor, where through the lace curtains they could see an elegant carriage pulled up to the front steps. The vehicle bore no markings they recognized, but the horses were fine and the driver wore livery. Expecting anyone? Mara asked. No one. They reached the front door just as the carriage door opened. Out stepped a distinguished gentleman in a dark suit, followed by a lady in traveling dress of deep green silk. Mr. Grayson? The gentleman called. I'm Charles Henley, and this is my wife, Margaret. We've come from Charleston with a proposition. Nathaniel and Mara exchanged glances. Visitors from Charleston usually meant business, and business often meant trouble. Please, come inside, Nathaniel said, opening the door wide. Though I should warn you, our household runs somewhat differently than most. Mr. Henley smiled. So we've heard. That's precisely why we're here. The Henleys settled in the front parlor, with tea and small cakes Cook had prepared. They appeared prosperous but not ostentatious, and their manner suggested genuine interest rather than mere curiosity. We've heard remarkable stories about your estate, Mrs. Henley said. About the changes you've implemented, the school you've established. Stories travel fast, Nathaniel replied carefully. Good stories do, especially when they offer hope. Mr. Henley leaned forward in his chair. We represent a group of investors, businessmen, and philanthropists who believe the South must change if it's to prosper. We've been seeking examples of successful transformation. Transformation? Estates that have moved beyond the old system, that treat all workers fairly and profit thereby. He gestured around the well-appointed room. From what we can see, you've achieved exactly that. Mara spoke for the first time. What kind of proposition are you offering? Mrs. Henley smiled at her directly, without the condescension most visitors showed. We'd like to fund an expansion of your model. Provide capital for additional improvements, support for the school, resources for other landowners who wish to follow your example. In exchange for what? Nathaniel asked. Documentation, records of your methods, your successes, your challenges, a detailed account that others can follow. You want us to write a manual for change? We want you to be pioneers, to prove that justice and profit can coexist. The offer was tempting, but Nathaniel hesitated. Why us? Surely there are larger estates, more established examples. Mr. Henley's expression grew serious. Because your transformation came from within, not imposed by outside pressure, but chosen as a matter of conscience. That's the only kind of change that lasts. And because, Mrs. Henley added, looking at Mara, your story demonstrates that talent and intelligence exist everywhere, in every condition. They only need opportunity to flourish. They talked for another hour, discussing terms and possibilities. The Henleys' vision was ambitious, a network of transformed estates, a new model for southern agriculture, schools and opportunities, spreading like seeds on fertile ground. As evening approached, the visitors prepared to depart for their lodgings in town. They would return tomorrow for a more detailed tour and further negotiations. One question before you go, Mara said as they stood on the front steps. Why do you believe this will work? Changing deeply rooted systems is dangerous business. Mr. Henley considered her question seriously. Because the alternative is unsustainable. The old ways are dying whether we guide the change or not. Better to build something new than to perish clinging to something dead. And, Mrs. Henley added, because we've seen what's possible when people are allowed to reach their potential. You're living proof of that principle. Their carriage disappeared into the gathering dusk, leaving Nathaniel and Mara standing on the porch steps where so much had changed 3 months earlier. What do you think? Nathaniel asked. I think they're right about change being inevitable. The question is whether we want to help shape it or let it shape us. And the proposition? Mara was quiet for a long moment, watching fireflies begin to dance among the oak trees. I think Mama would have liked the idea of her song becoming a map for others to follow. Then we'll consider it seriously. They went inside to join the family for evening meal, Mr. Grayson, who was well enough now to take supper in the dining room, Tilda, who had become the estate's unofficial steward, Isaiah, who had stayed for discussions about the school, Ben, whose wisdom was valued in all household decisions. It was an unusual family by conventional standards, bound by choice rather than blood, by shared values rather than shared names. But it was a family nonetheless, gathered around a common table where all voices were heard and all contributions valued. As they ate, they discussed the Henleys' proposition. The conversation was animated, full of questions and possibilities. Some worried about the attention such a partnership might bring, others saw opportunities for growth and influence. The real question, Isaiah said as Cook cleared the plates, is whether we're ready to be examples for others to follow. What do you mean? Mara asked. Success brings scrutiny. If we agree to this, we'll be inviting the world to watch everything we do, our failures as well as our successes. Are you saying we shouldn't do it? I'm saying we should be sure we're doing it for the right reasons, for the benefit of others, not for the praise of men. Mr. Grayson, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. I've spent years living for the praise of men, for social position and financial advantage. It nearly destroyed this family and enslaved my own stepdaughter. He looked around the table at each face in turn. If we can help prevent other families from making the same mistakes, shouldn't we try? Even if it's difficult? Tilda asked. Especially if it's difficult. Easy choices don't require courage. The discussion continued late into the evening, but gradually a consensus emerged. They would accept the Henleys' proposition, with careful conditions to protect their autonomy and ensure their story was told truthfully. As the household prepared for bed, Mara stepped out onto the kitchen porch where her journey had begun. The night air was soft with the promise of approaching winter, and stars shone clear in the dark sky. She hummed softly to herself, not "Wade the lantern low," but a new melody that had been growing in her mind for weeks, a song of hope rather than escape, of building rather than fleeing. Nathaniel found her there, drawn by the music. New song? He asked. New verse to an old song? About what comes after the wading, after the lantern leads you home. What comes after? Building. Teaching. Helping others find their own light to carry. They stood together in comfortable silence, brother and sister watching fireflies dance among the trees. From the quarters came the sound of evening prayers. Voices joined in gratitude for the day's blessings and hope for tomorrow's possibilities. Mara, Nathaniel said quietly, do you ever regret it, staying here instead of going north to real freedom? She considered the question, touching the golden ribbon at her wrist. I am free, legally, financially, spiritually. The papers say so, the law says so, and my heart says so. She paused. But more than that, I'm useful here. I'm needed. You could be useful anywhere. Maybe. But this is where my usefulness grew from slavery into freedom. This is where I learned that the smallest gift, given with love, can change everything. She smiled up at him. Why would I want to be anywhere else? A light appeared in the study window where someone, probably Isaiah, was writing by lamplight, preparing lessons for tomorrow's school session, or perhaps drafting a letter to potential supporters of their expanding mission. Come on, Mara said, stepping toward the door. Morning comes early, and those children won't teach themselves. As they went inside, the fireflies continued their ancient dance among the oak trees, tiny lights moving through darkness, each one carrying its own small lamp toward dawn. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, with frost painting the windows silver and smoke rising straight up from every chimney on the estate. The transformation of the past 6 months was visible everywhere in the fresh paint on the buildings, the improved roads, the expanded quarters where free families lived in dignity rather than bondage. But the deepest changes couldn't be seen. They lived in the laughter of children playing freely in the yard, in the confidence of workers who knew their labor was valued and their voices heard, in the peace that came from truth acknowledged and justice served. The chapel had been decorated for the Christmas service, pine boughs and red ribbons, candles burning bright in every window. The building was fuller than it had ever been, with families from the estate joining neighbors from surrounding farms for the celebration. Mara sat in the front pew between Nathaniel and Mr. Grayson, wearing a new dress of deep blue wool that had been a gift from Mrs. Henley. The partnership with the Charleston investors had proven fruitful, bringing resources that allowed for improvements without compromising principles. Isaiah stood at the pulpit, his Bible open to the 2nd chapter of Luke, but before he began the familiar story of the Nativity, he paused and looked out over the congregation. "Friends," he said, "before we hear again about the birth of our Lord, I want us to remember another birth, the birth of freedom that we've witnessed this year in our own community." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered crowd. A year ago, most of the people in this building lived under laws and customs that denied their humanity. Today, we gather as equals before God and neighbors before men. That transformation didn't happen by accident, he gestured toward Mara. It began with a gift, a small ribbon stitched with care and offered in love. Most of us would have called it insignificant, slave trifling, as someone once said, but God has a way of using small things to accomplish great purposes. Mara felt her cheeks warm as all eyes turned to her. She touched the golden ribbon at her wrist, thinking of that morning in the kitchen when she had nervously offered her small token to a man she barely knew. 5 loaves and 2 fishes, Isaiah continued. A widow's mite, a stable in Bethlehem. The pattern is consistent. God's greatest works often begin with the smallest offerings. He opened his Bible and began to read. And there were in the same country shepherds abiding in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night. As the familiar words washed over the congregation, Mara found herself thinking not of the shepherds in their fields, but of the people around her who had kept watch through their own dark nights. Tilda, faithfully tending the sick and wounded. Ben, quietly preserving truth through years of lies. Cook, maintaining dignity in the face of daily indignities. All of them shepherds in their own way, keeping watch until the dawn. The service continued with hymns and prayers, testimonies and thanksgiving. When it came time for the offertory, families came forward with their gifts, money for the poor, food for the hungry, promises to help their neighbors in the year to come. Mara approached the altar with her own offering, a piece of fabric she had been working on for weeks. It was larger than her original ribbon, more complex in design, with colored threads mapping not just one song but several traditional hymns, freedom songs, lullabies that mothers sang to comfort their children. "What is this?" Isaiah asked as she placed it on the altar. "A sampler, to teach the songs properly, so children can learn not just the words but the meaning behind them," the congregation murmured appreciatively. Several people came closer to examine the intricate work, tracing the patterns with their fingers. "This is remarkable," said Miss Patterson, the young teacher who had joined Mara at the school. "It's like sheet music made from thread." "That's exactly what it is," Mara replied. "Music you can touch, stories you can hold in your hands." After the service, families gathered outside the chapel despite the cold, reluctant to end the celebration. Children ran between the adults, their breath puffing white in the frosty air. Neighbors shared news and made plans for the new year. Mr. Henley approached Nathaniel and Mara, his wife beside him. The Charleston investors had become regular visitors, documenting the estate's progress and helping to connect them with other reformers across the South. "Remarkable service," Mr. Henley said, "and that sampler, may I examine it more closely?" Mara retrieved the fabric from the altar and spread it on a nearby table. The Henleys studied the intricate patterns, tracing the connections between melody and thread. "This could be invaluable. Missus," Henley said, "a way to preserve these songs and their meanings for future generations. Have you considered making copies?" her husband asked. "Other communities might benefit from such a resource." Mara glanced at Nathaniel, who nodded encouragingly. "I could teach others to make them. It's not difficult once you understand the system. We could fund such a project. Hire seamstresses, provide materials, distribute the finished pieces to schools and churches throughout the region." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the chapel entrance. A carriage had arrived, an elegant vehicle that looked familiar but unwelcome. Miss Eliza Morland stepped down from the carriage, followed by her mother and a gentleman they didn't recognize. Her dress was fashionable as always, but her face was hard as stone. The crowd fell quiet. No one had seen the Morlands since the failed wedding 6 months earlier, though rumors had circulated about their efforts to challenge the estate's transformation through legal means. Eliza approached with measured steps, her eyes fixed on Nathaniel. "Merry Christmas, darling. I hope you don't mind the intrusion." "Miss Morland." Nathaniel's voice was carefully neutral. "What brings you here? Family sentiment and curiosity about your experiment?" Her gaze moved to Mara, who stood perfectly still despite the tension crackling in the air. "I wanted to see for myself how you were faring." "We're faring well, thank you." "So I see." Eliza's smile was sharp as winter wind. "Though I wonder how long such prosperity can last when built on such unconventional foundations." The gentleman with her stepped forward, a man of middle years, with cold eyes and expensive clothes. "Allow me to introduce myself. Thomas Whitmore, attorney at law. I represent certain interests that have concerns about the irregular documentation surrounding this estate." Judge Carter, who had been enjoying holiday conversation with his neighbors, moved closer. "What kind of concerns, Mr. Whitmore?" "Questions about the validity of certain birth records. Suggestions that documents may have been fabricated to support false claims of inheritance." A chill ran through the gathering that had nothing to do with the weather. Mara felt Nathaniel tense beside her, but she remained calm. They had known this challenge would come eventually. The Morlands were not the type of people to accept defeat gracefully. "Those are serious accusations," Judge Carter said. "Do you have evidence to support them?" Whitmore pulled a folder from his coat. "I have testimony from handwriting experts who question the authenticity of the birth certificate. I have witnesses who claim the woman known as Mary was never pregnant with a Grayson child. And I have documentation suggesting the entire story was fabricated to avoid a profitable marriage." The crowd buzzed with murmurs. Some looked worried, others angry. A few seemed to be reconsidering their presence at such a controversial gathering. But Isaiah stepped forward, his Bible still in his hand. "Mr. Whitmore, are you a God-fearing man?" The attorney looked startled by the question. "I? Of course. What does that have to do with anything?" "Then you know that truth has a way of rising to the surface, no matter how deep men try to bury it." Isaiah's voice carried the authority of absolute conviction. "You also know that bearing false witness is a sin that cries out to heaven for justice." "I'm not bearing false witness. I'm presenting evidence. Evidence can be manufactured, just as easily as birth certificates, according to your theory." Mara stepped forward, her movement drawing every eye. The golden ribbon at her wrist caught sunlight, and the signet ring on its chain glinted against her blue dress. "Mr. Whitmore," she said quietly, "may I see your evidence?" The attorney hesitated, then handed her the folder. Mara opened it and studied the documents with the same careful attention she had once given to the doctor's Latin notes. After several minutes, she looked up. "These handwriting analyses are interesting, but I notice they focus only on the birth certificate. None of them examine the bill of sale that Mr. Pike used to claim ownership of me. That document isn't in question. It should be." Mara's voice was steady as steel. "Because if you're going to question the authenticity of one document, logic demands that you question them all." She turned to Judge Carter. "Your Honor, would you be willing to conduct a comparative examination to determine which documents are authentic and which are forged?" The judge nodded. "I would indeed. Then I propose we settle this matter once and for all. Not with accusations and legal maneuvering, but with honest investigation and true evidence." Whitmore's confidence wavered. "That's not. The process is more complex than." "The process," Judge Carter said firmly, "is whatever I determine it to be in my courtroom. And I'm very interested in getting to the bottom of this matter." He turned to the crowd. "January 15th, County Courthouse. We'll examine all documents, hear all testimony, and determine the truth once and for all." Eliza's face had gone pale. "That's not what we wanted. We simply hoped to raise legitimate questions about." "About what?" Nathaniel asked. "About whether my sister deserves her freedom. About whether justice served is preferable to lies maintained. About whether this entire charade has been an elaborate deception to avoid honoring legitimate contracts. The only deception here was the one that kept a free child in bondage for 12 years. His voice rose, carrying across the yard. The only fraud was the theft of money and the falsification of papers by a man who betrayed his trust. "Prove it," Eliza snapped. "Prove every word of your noble story in a court of law, before witnesses who weren't bought with your charity." "We will," Mara said simply. "With pleasure." The Morlands and their attorney retreated to their carriage, their Christmas mission clearly not accomplished as intended. As they drove away, the crowd slowly began to disperse, the celebratory mood dampened by the prospect of renewed legal battles. But Mara felt no discouragement. As she folded her sampler and prepared to return home, she hummed softly to herself a verse of "Wade the Lantern Low" that she had written for this very moment. When the darkness comes again, when the darkness comes again, hold your light up to the sky, and do not be afraid. Truth will shine in its own time. Truth will shine in its own time, and the morning will be brighter for the stand that you have made. January 15th dawned grey and cold, with snow dusting the ground and ice forming on the water buckets. The courthouse square filled early with spectators drawn by curiosity and the promise of dramatic revelations. Inside the courthouse, Judge Carter presided with solemn dignity. The attorneys arranged their papers and witnesses with the precision of generals preparing for battle. Spectators packed the gallery, their breath visible in the cold air that seeped through the building's old walls. Nathaniel sat at one table with his legal counsel, a young but capable attorney recommended by the Charleston investors. Mara sat beside him, wearing her best dress and the golden ribbon that had become her badge of identity. At the opposing table, the Morlands conferred with Whitmore and a second attorney they had brought from Richmond. Eliza wore black, as if attending a funeral, and her mother clutched a handkerchief with nervous fingers. Judge Carter called the court to order. "We're here to determine the authenticity of certain documents relating to the identity and legal status of the person known as Mara. The petitioners claim that documents establishing her as a free-born heir are fraudulent. The respondents maintain their validity and challenge the authenticity of documents claiming ownership. We'll examine all evidence and render a final determination." The proceeding began with Whitmore presenting his case. He called handwriting experts who testified about irregularities in the birth certificate. He presented witnesses who claimed Mary had never been pregnant. He produced financial records suggesting the entire story was a scheme to avoid the Morland marriage contract. His case was thorough and professional, but it rested entirely on questions and suspicions. He could point to possible inconsistencies, but could not prove deliberate fraud. When Nathaniel's attorney presented the defense, the story that emerged was very different. Document experts examined Pike's forged papers under magnification, revealing clear evidence of altered seals and manipulated wax. Medical testimony established that Mary had indeed been with child at the relevant time. And financial records, the real ones, finally extracted from Pike's hidden files, showed a clear pattern of theft and falsification going back years. But it was Mara's own testimony that proved decisive. Called to the witness stand, she spoke clearly and calmly about her memories, her education, her gradual discovery of the truth about her parentage. She answered every question with dignity, never showing anger at the accusations or defensiveness at the challenges to her story. Then Nathaniel's attorney produced the sampler she had made for Christmas, the intricate map of songs and melodies that demonstrated her remarkable abilities. "Miss Mara," the attorney said, "would you explain to the court how this work reflects your education and background?" Mara took the fabric in her hands, spreading it carefully on the witness stand rail. Each pattern represents a different song or hymn. The colored threads correspond to musical notes and phrases. It's a way of preserving melodies for people who can't read traditional sheet music. "And where did you learn this technique?" "From my mother. She taught me that music could be preserved in many forms, in memory, in voice, and in needlework like this. The complexity of this work suggests considerable education. How do you account for that, given your supposed status as an enslaved person?" "I was never truly enslaved in my mind, sir, and education finds a way to those who seek it. I learned to read from the Bible in the main house. I learned Latin from papers in the doctor's study. I learned music from hymns sung in the quarters. But this level of sophistication, surely it suggests formal training." Mara was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the patterns on her sampler. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear. "My mother told me stories when I was very young. before she died, before I was moved to the quarters. Stories about a white lady who had been kind to her, who had shared her books and her music. She looked up, her eyes finding Nathaniel in the courtroom. She never told me the lady's name, but she taught me to read and sing and stitch the way that lady had taught her. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Carter called for order, but the implication was clear. Mara had been educated by Nathaniel's mother, the very woman whose child she claimed to be. Whitmore rose for cross-examination, but his questions felt hollow against the weight of Mara's quiet testimony. He could challenge documents and question witnesses, but he could not challenge the obvious intelligence and education that marked her as something more than a common field hand. When the testimony concluded, Judge Carter called a recess to examine all documents privately. The courthouse emptied as spectators sought warmth and refreshment, but Mara and Nathaniel remained in their seats. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Peaceful," she replied. "Whatever happens, we've told the truth. That's all we can do." An hour later, Judge Carter returned to render his verdict. The courtroom filled quickly, every seat taken and people standing along the walls. After careful examination of all evidence presented, the judge began. "This court finds as follows. The birth certificate establishing Mara as the daughter of the late Mrs. Grayson is authentic and legally valid. The documents claiming ownership of said person are determined to be forgeries, created for the purpose of concealing legitimate inheritance rights." Relief flooded through Nathaniel's side of the courtroom, but Judge Carter wasn't finished. Furthermore, this court finds evidence of a broader pattern of fraud and conspiracy involving the falsification of estate records, the theft of property, and the deliberate concealment of legal rights. The estate of William Grayson is hereby cleared of all false debts and obligations. The person known as Mara is confirmed as a freeborn heir with all rights and privileges thereunto. The gavel fell with finality. In the gallery, supporters cheered while opponents sat in stunned silence. But as people began to file out of the courtroom, Eliza Morland stood and faced Mara directly. "You may have won your legal victory," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "But don't think this is over. Social acceptance is different from legal recognition. You'll find that court orders can't compel respect." Mara rose from her seat, still holding her sampler. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "Miss Morland, I never wanted your respect. I only wanted my freedom. Now I have it, legally and honestly. What you choose to do with your own heart is between you and God." For a moment, something flickered in Eliza's eyes, perhaps regret, perhaps recognition of the dignity she had tried so hard to deny. But the moment passed, and she gathered her skirts to leave. As she reached the courtroom door, she turned back one final time. "That ribbon," she said, pointing to the golden band at Mara's wrist. "Do you really think it makes you equal to ladies of breeding?" Mara looked down at the ribbon, then back at Eliza. "This ribbon doesn't make me equal to anyone. It reminds me that I was always equal. I just needed papers to prove what God already knew." Eliza left without another word, and Mara never saw her again. Spring came early that year, bringing green to the fields and warmth to the air. The estate bustled with activity as expanded operations took shape under the guidance of free workers earning fair wages. The school had grown beyond all expectations, with children arriving from neighboring farms and even distant towns. Miss Patterson had proven an excellent teacher, and together she and Mara had developed a curriculum that emphasized both practical skills and higher learning. The partnership with the Charleston investors had flourished, bringing resources that allowed for improvements while maintaining the estate's independence. Other landowners had begun visiting to learn about their methods, and several had implemented similar reforms on their own properties. But the most significant change was harder to quantify: the sense of hope that permeated the community. People walked taller, spoke more freely, planned for futures they could actually control. On a warm April afternoon, Mara sat on the chapel porch grading arithmetic papers from her students. The golden ribbon at her wrist caught sunlight as she worked, and occasionally she hummed softly to herself, snatches of old hymns and new melodies that seemed to arise spontaneously from her contentment. Isaiah approached from the direction of the school, a letter in his hand and excitement in his eyes. "Child, you need to see this." Mara set down her papers and took the letter. It bore an elegant seal and expensive stationery. "Who's it from?" Read it and see. The letter was from a publisher in Boston, responding to samples of Mara's musical samplers that the Henleys had sent north. The publisher was interested in commissioning a book, a collection of traditional songs with both musical notation and corresponding needlework patterns. They want to publish my work? Mara's voice was barely a whisper. They want to share it with the world. Make it available to teachers and mothers and anyone who wants to preserve these songs for future generations. Mara read the letter again, hardly believing the words. The publisher offered not only to buy her work, but to employ her as a consultant, ensuring the songs were presented accurately and respectfully. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Nathaniel's voice came from behind them. He approached from the house, his own face bright with excitement. I've been corresponding with educators in Philadelphia. They're interested in your teaching methods, your musical preservation techniques. There are opportunities there, real opportunities for someone with your gifts. Mara looked from the letter to the faces of her friends, then out across the fields where workers moved with purpose and dignity. Children's laughter drifted from the school building, mixing with the sound of hammers as new cabins were constructed for growing families. You think I should go north? I think you should consider it, Nathaniel said gently. You could reach more people, help more children, preserve more music than you ever could here. But this is my home. Home isn't just a place. It's the people who love you and the work that calls you. Those can exist anywhere. Isaiah nodded agreement. Child, you taught us that freedom means choices. Now you have choices to make. That evening, the household gathered around the dinner table as they had every night since the transformation began. Mr. Grayson presided with renewed health and vigor. Tilda shared news from the midwife's rounds. Ben reported on the spring planting. Cook complained cheerfully about keeping up with the expanded household. But the conversation inevitably turned to the letter from Boston and the possibilities it represented. What does your heart tell you? Mr. Grayson asked, when Mara had shared the publisher's offer. It tells me several things at once, she replied honestly. Pride that my work is valued, excitement about reaching more people, fear about leaving everything familiar, and gratitude for having the choice at all. A year ago, I couldn't choose what to eat for breakfast, much less where to live and work. So the question isn't what you should choose, Tilda observed, but how to choose wisely. The discussion continued long into the evening, with everyone offering perspectives and asking questions. No pressure was applied, no preferred outcome advocated. It was simply a family helping one of its members think through an important decision. As the household prepared for bed, Mara stepped outside into the soft spring air. Stars shone clear in the dark sky, and from the quarters came the sound of evening songs, not the coded hymns of escape, but the open harmonies of people at peace. She walked to the cemetery where her adoptive mother Mary lay buried beneath a simple stone marker. The grave was well tended, with spring flowers blooming around its edges. What should I do, Mama? She whispered to the night air. The answer came not in words but in memory, her mother's voice singing lullabies, teaching patience, demonstrating that love could flourish even in the darkest circumstances. Follow your gifts where they lead, the memory seemed to say. Serve others as you've been served. Make sure the songs don't die. The next morning, Mara made her decision. She would accept the publisher's offer, but with conditions. She would spend summers in Boston, working with editors and educators to produce the books and materials. But she would return each fall to the estate, to the school, to the community that had shaped her and needed her presence. It was not a choice between home and opportunity, but a recognition that both could coexist if she was creative and committed enough to make it work. When she announced her decision at breakfast, the response was immediate and unanimous approval. This was a solution that honored all her commitments while maximizing her impact. When will you leave? Nathaniel asked. After the school term ends. Late May, perhaps. And when will you return? September. In time for the fall planting and the new school year. It was a plan that satisfied everyone, but as the weeks passed and departure grew closer, Mara felt the weight of leaving even temporarily. The night before her journey to Boston, the community gathered for a farewell service in the chapel. The building was packed, with people standing along the walls and spilling out onto the porch. Isaiah presided, but the service was really a celebration of Mara's gifts and a blessing for her journey. Person after person rose to speak about what her presence had meant. Children who had learned to read, families who had received medical care guided by her perfect memory, neighbors who had been inspired by her courage. When it came time for the final hymn, someone called for "Wade the Lantern Low." The familiar melody rose from dozens of voices, but now it was sung openly, proudly, as a song of journey rather than escape. As the last notes faded, Mara stood to address the congregation. "A year ago, I offered a small ribbon to a man I barely knew. I thought it was just a token, a way to say congratulations and show respect." She touched the golden ribbon at her wrist. "I never imagined it would lead to all this freedom, family, opportunities I couldn't have dreamed." She looked around the crowded chapel, making eye contact with faces that had become dear to her. "I'm leaving tomorrow, but I'm not really going away. I'm carrying all of you with me, your songs, your stories, your belief that no gift is too small to matter." Her voice grew stronger. "And I'm carrying a promise to make sure these songs live on, that other children learn them, that the freedom we've found here spreads to other places." She paused, overwhelmed for a moment by the weight of responsibility and love. "Wade the lantern low," she sang softly, and immediately other voices joined her. "Wade the lantern low, there's a better day a-coming when the harvest time is nigh." But as the hymn continued, Mara added a new verse, one that had been forming in her mind for weeks. "Take the light where you go. Take the light where you go. Every candle that you kindle makes the darkness lose its hold. Share the songs that you know. Share the songs that you know, for the melody of freedom never gets too old." The congregation took up the new verse immediately, voices blending in harmonies that seemed to rise from the earth itself. And in that moment, surrounded by people who had become family and music that had become a map to freedom, Mara understood that she wasn't leaving home at all. She was expanding it. 10 years later, on a golden October evening, Mara sat on the same chapel porch where her journey had begun. Her hair was touched with early silver, and her hands showed the calluses of years spent teaching, writing, and preserving the music of her people. The estate had continued to prosper and grow. The school now educated over 100 children each year, with graduates going on to colleges and careers throughout the region. The agricultural innovations had been copied by dozens of other landowners, creating a network of reformed estates that stretched across 3 states. The books had been published not just one, but a series that preserved hundreds of traditional songs with their meanings and methods intact. Teachers from Maine to Georgia used Mara's materials, and her techniques had been adopted by schools throughout the country. But perhaps most importantly, the principles they had established, that all people deserved dignity, that talent existed everywhere, that justice and prosperity could coexist, had taken root in ways they had never imagined. Nathaniel approached from the house, moving slower than he once had, but still carrying himself with quiet dignity. He had never married, choosing instead to dedicate his life to the estate and its expanding mission. "Letter from Boston," he said, handing her an envelope. Mara opened it and read quickly, then smiled. "The university wants me to lecture next spring on the preservation of folk traditions. Will you go?" "Of course. But I'll be back by planting time." It had become their rhythm, summers in the north, winters in the south, each season bringing new opportunities to share what they had learned and learn from others. "Any other news?" Nathaniel asked, settling into the chair beside her. "Thomas graduated from medical school. He'll be returning next month to establish a practice here." Thomas was the boy who had arrived unable to read his own name and had grown into a brilliant physician. He was one of dozens of success stories, children whose lives had been changed by access to education and opportunity. And Sarah's engaged to that young lawyer from Richmond. Sarah was Miss Patterson's daughter, born and raised on the estate, now planning to return with her husband to establish a legal practice dedicated to civil rights. Good news all around. They sat in comfortable silence as evening deepened around them. From the quarters no longer called that, but still the heart of the community came the sound of families gathering for evening meals. Children played in the yards, their laughter mixing with the voices of parents and grandparents. "Do you ever wonder," Nathaniel asked, "what would have happened if you hadn't offered me that ribbon?" Mara touched the golden band at her wrist, still bright after all these years. "I think God would have found another way. Truth has a way of surfacing eventually. Maybe. But I'm grateful it happened the way it did. So am I." A young voice called from the yard, one of the current students at the school. "Miss Mara, will you sing for us?" She rose and walked to the porch rail where she could see a group of children gathered under the old oak tree. Their faces looked up at her expectantly, waiting for the evening song that had become tradition. "What would you like to hear?" "Wade the lantern low," they chorused. Mara smiled and began to sing, her voice still clear and true despite the years. The children joined in immediately, their young voices blending with hers in harmonies they had learned in the schoolhouse. But as the song progressed, Mara found herself thinking not of the words they were singing, but of the words she had written so many years before about taking the light where you go, sharing the songs that you know, expanding the melody of freedom until it touched every corner of the world. Looking out over the community they had built, the lives they had changed, the future they had made possible, she knew that the small gift of a stitched ribbon had indeed become something larger than any of them had ever imagined. And in the gathering dusk, surrounded by voices raised in song and hearts joined in purpose, Mara understood that some gifts never stop giving. They just keep growing, generation by generation, until they become the very foundation of hope itself. As the last notes of the hymn faded into the soft southern evening, a new day's light already waited somewhere beyond the horizon, carrying with it endless possibilities for those brave enough to offer their own small gifts to the world. The end.